It's March 23rd, 2003. My name is Betty Kazaroff. My husband was Jim Kazaroff. I had two children, John and Dolly. I'm the grandmother of Jamie and Mark Moreau. I'm the great-grandmother of Jillian, Jimmy, Kyle, and Jake, who I always seem to refer to as Gus. I don't know why, but I do.
Good, that's how I want you to be. Okay.
That's just me.
So who was your mom and dad?
Oh, my mother was Evelyn Holland. Her maiden name was Corey. She was half Indian and Syrian. Her father was Frank Corey. Her mother, full-blood Syrian. Her mother was Josephine Boone, a descendant actually of Daniel Boone and Nathaniel Boone. They were our family.
Tell us about your grandmother.
My grandmother lived to be 72 years old, but my mother lived to be almost 92. I happen to be 75 now.
And what do you remember about your grandmother? Do you remember anyone before your grandmother?
No.
Okay, so what do you remember about your grandmother?
My grandmother was a wonderful woman. She loved me a lot, and I loved her very much. She taught me all about religion. I went with her and was baptized when I was 12. And at that time, I really thought I was going to be a missionary. I really did. But I kind of changed. But I used to visit her every summer. And because we didn't have money, my mother would send me $1 a week. We would go downtown. We walked 3 miles to town, which seemed like nothing. Because, you know, when you're young and you're skinny and you don't have food, you can walk a long way. So we would go down there and we would go to Crest. It was called Crest Dime Store. And for that $1, I could get enough Oreo cookies to last me 1 month, because I only ate one every day. My grandmother was real good to me, and I loved her very much.
Where'd they live?
She lived in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, and before she died, she moved to Los Angeles to be with her daughter, my mother, and her death was caused by diabetes. She went into a coma and went very peacefully. So did my mother. My mother happened to lay her head on the pillow when she died and just passed away.
And when you were being taken around in Oklahoma, about what years was that?
1937. I was born in 1927, and I lived was born in Muskogee, Oklahoma. We moved to Oklahoma City when my mother married my stepfather, Millard Holland, and he raised me from the time I was 3 until his death. And he was very good to me. I had a very good stepfather. He made sure that I had food to eat and a roof over my head and went to school.
And so your birth date is?
My birthday is July the 10th, 1927, and I always call myself a fizzled out firecracker.
So tell us, your mother was married to several different people. Tell us about her life.
Woohoo! My mother had 3 children. One died. She had 3 children and 3 husbands by the time she was 17 years old. She was a child raising children, but her mother had to help her. And so her mother raised my brother because she had raised him from birth to about 3 or 4 years old. And when my stepfather married my mother and took me to Oklahoma City, my brother had to stay behind. And he's told me often about how he stood and waved at me as the car drove away because they were taking his little baby.
Okay, when you say, just remember for the tape that no one knows who we're talking about. So when you say your brother, say Bob
Okay.
Overton. and senior,
My mother,
and my stepfather, who was there, whoever.
My mother, Evelyn, had 3 husbands. She had my brother, Bob Overton, was his, Cecil Overton was his father. Then she married my father, Blue Culver, whose both his parents were full-blood Indian, which makes me a lot of Indian because my grandmother was half. And then she married Millard Holland, which became my stepfather. I never knew my father, ever. Their marriage was annulled because she was so young. I've never seen a picture of him. I understand that through friends of my mother that he did remarry after he got older because he was just a kid himself, and he had children. So I do have half brothers and sisters somewhere, but I tried to look up my father many, many years, and I just never could find him. I always thought he was in Oklahoma, and then I found out about 10 years ago that all this time I'd been looking for him in Oklahoma. He was in Long Beach, and he was a piano player, an entertainer. And this really shocked me because that's what I always wanted to be.
And so you found that he was dead? I mean, when did
Yes,
you find out?
he died of a heart attack in Long Beach, and I think his age was 70.
And how long after that did you find out that he was there?
2 years. A friend of my mother's called and told my mother that she had heard that Blue Culver had died. Today is March the 23rd, 2003. My name is Betty Kazaroff. I'm in my daughter Dolly's home. We're recording this at 11 o'clock at night. And ironically, it's been 4 days since the war started with Iraq. President Bush gave the orders to go in and do what they had to do. We've already lost some men, which is quite sad, but I guess this is something that has to be done. Ironically, when I moved to California with my mom and dad, it was also wartime. It was World War II. I was 17, and I went to work with my mother in a defense plant. I was in charge of the corrugated, you put them in the bottom of an airplane to walk on. They were big corrugated, I don't know what you call them. You walk on it. It's like a floor. And I had to wash all the oil. I don't know why there was oil on it, but I had to wash all the oil off, make sure they were clean before they went in the plane. My mother was chief inspector of one of the most important parts of the aircraft. She was so proud of that because she was a head inspector. And we made very good money, actually. That was one reason we came to California, because Oklahoma wasn't the place that we should be. Then I went to work while I was going to Garfield High School in East Los Angeles. I went to work at the United Artists Theater, and television was in, but it wasn't as popular as now, actually. And I worked in the box office, and you had to have a real good figure to fit into the uniforms, and thank goodness I did, or I wouldn't have gotten the job. And that is where I met John and Dolly's father. He came to the box office and asked me for a date, and the girl that was taking tickets ran out to the cashier's cage and said, "Do you know who that was?" And I said, "No." She said, "That's Jim Kazaroff." I said, "So?" She said, "Well, he's Armenian and he's rich." Well, that's all I needed to hear. So anyway, through a long process, we were married, and like I said, we had 2 of the best kids in the world that ever lived. They still are, John and Dolly.
Where was the theater located?
The theater was located on Whittier Boulevard. Whittier Boulevard is still there, and recently John took uh, me and Dolly back for a look at where we used to live in East LA, and we saw the house that they were babies in, and where their grandmother, Alice Kazaroff, Jim's mother, where she lived, and brought back a lot of good memories, but it also brought back some sad ones too.
Didn't you work at a department store too?
I worked at the largest department store in Los Angeles. It was the first Sears store on Atlantic Boulevard, and I was the head cashier in a cashier's cage where they had a safe as big as 10 rooms that you could walk in, and I had to collect all the money at night, and I was my partner and I were the last people out of the Sears every night. We had to close up. It was a good job. I made good money. From there I went to the telephone company downtown Los Angeles, where I worked as comptometer operator, and I made very good money there too. I was good at all my jobs. I was bonded at the theaters for $100,000. That was good in those days. We also had gas rationing. Oh, you'd do anything to get a gasoline stamp so you could get in the automobile and go somewhere. And we had 3 girls that we all ran around together. And then we had a 4th one. She was kind of she had the car. The only thing she didn't have was the looks. But we took her. She had all the gas stamps, and she could get us hose. You could only have 1 pair of hose. That's all they gave you. So we got makeup, and it was called leg makeup, so it wouldn't run when it was sunny, but it did. So you had to carry your leg makeup with you so you could keep putting leg makeup on. And it was fun. We went to a lot of dances. Oh, I had a girlfriend, Frances. She was a dancer. She'd been a dancer all her life. She and I danced for the USO in Hollywood. And we danced with the soldiers and stuff, but you couldn't date them. You had to leave them at the door. Sometimes that was tough. We had good times. She went on to become, she doesn't like for me to say stripper, because it wasn't like now. They were not nude. They had everything that a bikini bathing suit had on. So she was covered, and she wanted me to go with her to dance with Evelyn West, who was one of the most famous dancers at that time. And I went there, and I was interviewed, and I had a choice. Either go and dance with her all over the United States and overseas, or to get married. So I got married, thank God, because I had John and Dolly.
When we were kids, you used to drive us through Arlington, and somewhere there in the middle of orange groves was a huge Dixie cup, or Lily cup, I think is what it was called. And you used to say
Lily Tulip. Yeah. You want me to go into that?
Yeah, didn't you work there?
I also worked for the head man of Lily Tulip Cup Corporation. Lily Tulips are still used today.
What are they? Explain to them.
They're paper cups, regular paper cups that you drink from. And he's the one who started the company. I was his personal secretary, and because my shorthand, only I could read it, I could take it, but I could read it, but no one else in the office could read all of my shorthand because I had different little symbols that I used. So he said, "You don't have to take shorthand, Betty. You can use a dictaphone." So he would dictate through this like an earpiece, and it was kind of like a record, and you'd play it, and then you'd type. I was a very good typist. In school, I didn't even have to take typing from the 9th grade on, because I typed so fast and so accurate that the teachers let me stay out of class and go to the office, and I got straight A's in typing.
So, tell us about your second to last job. You just finished your last job a few months ago. What was your second to last job?
Oh, when we moved to Hemet, the kids were babies. I was a homemaker. Actually cooked too. I was a homemaker until they were almost in junior high school because my husband would not allow me to work. But I got to where I just couldn't stay home all the time, so he said, okay. There was a job opening at Brubaker Realty, one of the largest in Hemet. Still is, actually. And Nani Laments, someone I knew, said, you're the only person I know who can fill this job. I had an interview with Roger Brubaker, and he hired me on the spot. I told Jim about it, and because of such good money, he let me take the job. And I was usually home by the time my kids got home.
He didn't want you to work?
Jim? Oh no, he didn't want me to work. That wasn't the Armenian style. The wives were supposed to stay home.
So how did you end up, what was the last job? And why were you working then?
That was the last job. I worked there 10 and a half years, to the day.
Now you make 90 grand a year over the past couple of years.
Oh, there? My last job?
You know, she's a professional gambler.
Oh, is that on there?
OK Associates.
Oh, my last job was with OK Associates, of which there were 4 partners. My husband, his brother Benny, and 2 cousins, Alan and Greg Oganesian. And when my husband passed away 13 years ago, I took over the secretarial part of it and worked that until my grandson Mark took over for me so that I could stay home. So I was more or less part-time until the business was sold in April of this year. It was a garbage business. We picked up the garbage. We had the contract with the city of San Jacinto. By the way, I forgot to mention, John and Dolly both were born in Maywood, California.
So that's East LA?
In East Los Angeles. No, Maywood, California. It was by 20 minutes from East LA or something like that.
Don't talk on top of her. Notice I'm not doing that, because I can't edit then. So how did you get from East LA to Hemet? Or was there any place in between?
My husband, his father, and his brother had a hog ranch in Covina before we moved to Hemet. They had 10,000 head of hogs that they had to move out of Los Angeles County. We couldn't find anything in San Bernardino County, but we found this ranch, 106 acres, past Winchester, California, which was about 30 minutes from Hemet. Jim did not want me to live on the ranch because he knew that I was afraid of snakes and etc. So we bought the only new house. They had one new house in Hemet that had just been built. And so we bought that house, small 3-bedroom home. And
Where? Address?
468 North Weston Place in Hemet. The population sign was on my corner, and there was 1,200 people here at that time.
What did that mean? What was Hemet like when there was only 1,200 people?
When there was only 1,200 people, we never locked our doors. We might latch our screen and leave it open because of the intense heat in the summer. But we never locked our cars, left the windows down. Everything was safe. Everything you had in your yard was safe for many, many years. I would say almost until the last 15 years maybe, things were very safe. But now things have changed so much. Now we have gangs and we have, for so many years, Hemet didn't even have a murder, ever. For like 30 years that I lived here, 40 years, and then all of a sudden, those things start happening. But that's part of today's society.
What about when you parked your car? You left the windows down though, didn't you?
Always.
And so what did you do for entertainment in Hemet?
We had one theater downtown. It was called Martin's Theater, and we had one drive-in theater, and that was it. That was entertainment, because they didn't have anything here for young people, number one, except 3 bars, and they had dancing in the bars and booze in the bars. And I used to smoke. I used to smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day. That was a lot. They were called Salem. They were menthol, which is very bad for your body. But I did it. I don't remember how many years. The only thing I remember is I quit when they were 25 cents a pack, which must have been at least 18 years ago. And now they're what, $2 a pack, $3 a pack, something like that.
Talk to me about the night before you took me to kindergarten for the first time, and then what that was like.
I don't want to cry on this video.
No, just talk about John. You gotta refer to him as John. They don't know who I am.
My son John?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, my son John did not talk when he was growing up as from a baby up to 4 years old. All he did was point, and he would go, and I'd say, what do you want? You want milk? Do you want bread? Whatever. And I would give him anything that he pointed at. So technically, he didn't really have to talk, but I think there was something else, other reason, who knows. I went to a movie, and I saw this movie with, I thought it was Doris Day, but I don't think it was. Anyway, she was teaching her son to talk. And I thought, this is a good thing. Dolly and myself, my daughter Dolly and myself, and my husband Jim got ready to go to the drive-in movie. And John got all ready to go and ran in the kitchen. And I set him on the table. And I said, you can't go. And he looked at me and he went, And I said, no, you can't go because you can't talk. And he looked at me and I said, John, if you will say show, you can go. And I went, show. And he just looked at me with this stare. It was pitiful, it really was. But I was trying my best to see if this boy could talk. And finally, when I acted like I was leaving, he went, do, do. And that's the first thing he ever said. He never even said mama or daddy or anything. Dolly talked right away.
You didn't walk out the back door?
I walked towards the back door. Anyway, by the time he was 4, almost 5, and it was time to go to kindergarten, I dreaded that day. He was holding on my leg. He wouldn't let me walk. I took him up to the gate, and he was clinging to my hand. And he was, don't go, don't go, don't go. And I said, honey, I have to. You have to go to school. Please, please. And I said, I have to go. That's the hardest thing that mothers do, because they're still doing it today. So anyway, I took him in the room, and oh, he was crying so loud. And Mrs. McAllister, who was his teacher, said, you have to go, because he will get over this. Well, I thought he would, but we went through the same thing the next day and the next day. And finally, I don't really remember why, but he finally stayed. I think he made a friend, and he stayed.
And did they tell you what I did all day?
No?
You don't remember me hiding under the benches?
Hiding under the benches?
Yeah, I wouldn't come out or anything?
No, I don't.
remember that, okay? I thought that's something you told me.
I could have.
What was it like when you came to think back up? The first day. Do you remember?
You were happy, is all I remember.
Okay.
I mean, you were, thank God I'm going home. I think he thought I put him in jail or something.
Okay. Then there's the story of Don. Dolly, when, didn't we have, talk about, we had a gas tank in our backyard.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much.
My daughter Dolly was about, how old? 6? I think she was around 6. And I always told her where we had our gas tank, there was a deep ditch, at least 6 foot tall, maybe 7, I don't know, 8 foot. It was really deep, okay? And I always told her, don't go near this, because if you fall in, you will die. That's exactly what I told her. Now, I didn't even know that whether she knew what die meant, but from the way I said it, I'm sure that she knew it was bad, okay? I told both the kids this. And then one day, I could barely hear something. I usually was outside with the kids, but John and I were watching TV, and I heard this little noise. Help, help. And I ran outside, and when I looked into that deep hole, she said, I didn't die, I didn't die. I remember that I remember very well. And I had to go across the street and get one of the men that lived over there to get a ladder and go in and get her. But I was just devastated. That's the closest. No, that was the first time that she almost died. The second time, I took her to the swimming pool at the high school, and all I did was sit her on the edge of the pool, and some reason I had to turn around. I only turned for a second, and when I turned back, she was gone. She was literally gone. And I looked, and she was on the bottom of the pool. And someone got her, because I couldn't swim or anything. It was all I could do to be in there. So she was saved a second time.
Let's go back to Melvin for a second. Tell me about his personality and what he was like, and how Evelina, explain, why is she known as Evelina and Evelyn? I call my mother Evelina because that was her choice. She was so young, and I think she, deep down, because she wanted to get a husband, she wanted them to think that she was my sister. And she finally, after being called Evelina for so long, she wanted to be called Evelyn. So people started calling her Evelyn. Melvin was a cook, a chef. People used to come into the restaurant and they could not speak. They had to use their hands, sign language. And he learned all of the sign language, and he used to talk to all the people, and they used to come there, and they loved to eat there because Melvin waited on them, and they could talk to him. He was real good with most people. He and my mother had a stormy, stormy marriage. You want me to tell about the bad part? Yeah, why?
Melvin drank a lot. Sometimes he would have 2 quarts of beer before he went to work. He was very good to me. He never, ever was mean to me. He whipped me one time in my life, and it's because we went to buy a watermelon, and it was a heavy watermelon, and I weighed about 80 pounds, and I insisted on carrying it. And I was carrying it, running to the car, and I dropped it and broke it. We didn't have money for a second one, and he just whipped me really hard. So that was the only time he was mean. But he helped me through school with my schooling. And we moved to California, and he worked for the Brown Derby, and that was a big restaurant. And he was the head chef, and he was so good. He was such a good cook. He always cooked the Christmas dinners and Thanksgiving and all that. But their marriage was real rocky. A lot of, because of his drinking, and because of my mother's jealousy, of which I inherited, there was a lot of actual fighting, which was not so hot when you're growing up. Children shouldn't see things like this, and I hope that my children that follow me, the great-grandchildren and their people, don't have to go through that.
Evelina and Melvin would cook for us when we came, brought the when I brought my children in to visit. And the favorite thing they cooked, the best thing they ever cooked was, remember?
Chicken and dumplings.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
chicken.
that's it, yeah.
So,
My mother was a good cook also. The one thing that everybody loved that my mom cooked was her chicken and dumplings. She made the best chicken dumplings ever. So did my grandmother, Josephine Boone. She made real good chicken dumplings. She taught Evelina how to cook them. Evelina never taught me because I wasn't the best cook in the world, but I did cook. Biscuits was everybody's favorite. And they didn't make them with milk, they made them with water. And they were better than they were when you made them with milk. It was a good time.
so how many different places did you live with when you were living with them growing up?
When I was a little girl, the first home that I can remember was a hotel. And I used to sit on the steps.
Where? What city?
Oklahoma City. And that's when my dad was a cook, like I told you. And from there, we moved into an apartment that was on a side street in Oklahoma City. That's where I met my girlfriend Frances and her mother Cleola, that my mother became best friends with. From there, we moved 4 blocks away to an upstairs apartment. And we lived there about 2 years, and we moved another half a block away to a house, a regular house, beautiful house. And we rented there. And one day, my mother was outside right after we had moved, and she saw this man go down to the taxi cab, get in the cab, and drive away. He wasn't the driver, but he was in the cab. And the lady that lived downstairs met my mother halfway down the block. And she said, "Did you know that man asked where you were living? He was looking for his daughter." That was my father. That's the closest I ever came. And I missed it.
So where did you guys live when you came to California?
When we came to California, we lived at 942 East Berger in East Los Angeles, in a little stucco house with big palm trees in front, big backyard. It was nice. We rented.
And then, where did they go? At what point did you leave and get married? And where were the rest of their homes?
You want me to tell about going to Vegas, get married on Halloween?
Sure.
Okay. I met this. I told you I had already about the show and him asking me for the date, okay? So I started going with Jim, and I went with Jim 2.5 years, every single night. And I got pregnant and had to get married. I didn't want to get married, and I told him so, because I didn't want to get married that way. So I said, why don't I just go and live with my grandmother and have the child, and we won't ever see each other again. And he said, no. I said, well, I don't want to be married and have somebody say, I had to marry you. He said, I promise you to him this day, I will never say that to you. And he never did. He kept his promise, and that was the good part. But we had to tell everybody that he told his mom and dad that he was going up to the mountains, and I told my mother I was going somewhere with a girlfriend. I'm 20 years old, or whatever I was at that time. It wasn't as if I was 16. And we drove to Vegas, and we looked for a justice of the peace. We found one. We didn't have witnesses, and you had to have witnesses. So there was a girl that was about 9 months pregnant, and a sailor, and they said they would witness for us if we would witness for them. And then it didn't cost any money. So we did that, and it was Halloween, October 31st. I was dressed all in black. That was the popular thing then. The most popular color for women to wear was black, black hose, the sheer black hose, black real high heels, 3.5 inches, and I had black hat and black gloves and my black dress. All in black on Halloween. Who else would do that? I changed in a restroom in a service station from the clothes that I was wearing in the car. I don't know what he had on, I don't remember. But the Justice of the Peace married us. And I guess he'd been really drinking the night before because we could smell the booze. We almost got drunk from his breath. But anyway, he married us. And we started right back home because we were just supposed to be gone overnight. And on the way home in San Bernardino, they have a motel that's still there where they are wigwams. And we stayed in the wigwam. I did. No, he did. He had to sleep because he was so tired. And so I stayed outside and talked to the women and told them I had just been married. And they were surprised because it was Halloween that night, you know. And then we came back home, went to my house, told my mom knew, okay? His mother and dad didn't. My mother knew that, you know, naturally she knew that I was pregnant and we had to get married, and we didn't want to tell his mother and dad until we could really discuss it. And so I went home and I went to bed as usual. And the next morning, there was a knock at our door. And I had gone with this sailor for a long time. He was like part of the family, you know. And he came by. His name was Bob Atkins. And he didn't know that I'd gotten married. And I told him I got married last night. And he said, "Oh, I was so hoping you'd wait for me." He had been overseas all this time that I was going with Jim. Anyway,
Hang on a second.
you have to get in. You have to get in my movie, little baby. Poor dog.
Okay, so what was the last sentence?
Bob Atkins came over. And
Yeah, he was surprised and he sat there and cried. That was pathetic. And that's the last I ever saw of him because I'm now married and have to think of some way to tell his mom and dad about it. They had already planned a wedding for me.
His mom and dad about it.
Uh-huh.
Jim.
Who were?
That was Jim's parents, John Kazaroff, who came over from Armenia on the boat. His name is on Ellis Island as one of the refugees who came over. And he met Alice Kazaroff, and she was from Mexico. Alice Gonzalez from Mexico. She could speak no Armenian. He could speak no Mexican. And it was kind of a real funny love match, but they made it. And they had a very interesting life, especially since my father-in-law couldn't speak English. He somehow got a job on the railroad. And he worked one day. I don't know what he did, but he worked one day on the railroad. And he stopped, when the train stopped, he stopped to light a cigarette the second day. And they said, "You can't smoke." And he got upset at them. And so he quit. So then he went.
Hang on, so he quit.
No.
What does he want? Something to munch on? Do you want to go in there? But try to be as quiet as you can. Okay, and so he quit.
He got a job for one day.
So he quit, and someone told him, it must have been another Armenian, that he should get a horse and buggy and start hauling trash. Because people,
And where was this?
somewhere in San Bernardino. I guess it was right in San Bernardino County. And so that's
So you didn't, you left some of the story out. He comes over to Ellis Island. How does he get to San Bernardino? Didn't he stay in New York a while or what?
No, he got to San Bernardino. That's where most of the Armenians were heading. Los Angeles, San Bernardino, because most of them started rubbish businesses. They were surprised he actually didn't. He had this little horse and buggy, and he worked with it. And he went to this little tiny restaurant every day, and all he did was order coffee, and then he would look and see what the other person had on their plate, and he would point, give me that. And so the guy behind the counter gave him that, the owner. And finally the owner said, "You don't speak English." And he understood just enough, and he went, "No." And he started teaching him eggs, bacon, whatever. And little by little, he learned that way. Plus, I guess someone else taught him along the way. But he did learn. And like I said, he met Alice Gonzalez, and they married and had Jim Kazaroff and Benny Kazaroff and Esther Kazaroff. And they had twin boys who died, I guess, at birth.
And out of those three, who was the oldest? Who was first?
And out of those three, Esther was the oldest, then Jim. Esther was the oldest. The twins died, Jim and then Benny. My mother-in-law became sick when Benny was 6 months or a year old, and she had tuberculosis and had to go into a sanitarium, because that's what they did with them now. They can heal it now with medicine and shots and pills and things, but they couldn't then. You had to go into a sanitarium, and they took out one lung. The other one was okay, and it was okay till the end of her life, actually. But she was in that sanitarium for 5 years. So John had to hire a housekeeper, and he hired an Irish lady who the kids really loved, all three of them, and kept in touch with her for many years. And she was there for 5 years. And in those days, they burned all of Alice Kazaroff's bedding and everything. They had to burn her clothes and everything because everything could be contaminated. So Benny actually grew up with someone else that wasn't really a mother.
So you launched off into them, but you never finished the story of how you told them you were married.
Okay, getting back to telling them about us getting married, we went over to the house for dinner, their house, and it was just like I thought it would be. They were not happy. They liked me a lot. I've been going with him 2.5 years. But in those 2.5 years that I went with him, about every 6 months, Jim's father would take him to another family's house that wanted to marry off their daughter to someone who had money. And Jim's father did have money. And so he met all these beautiful Armenian girls. And he would tell me he was going. He said, "But don't worry." He said, "Because I won't marry them. I'm going to marry you." This is before the pregnancy and stuff. So anyway, he went 5 times. And then he told his dad, he said, "That's it. I can't go anymore." And then I became pregnant and we got married, and that's where that went. So we told his mom and dad. His mother was pretty nice about it, actually, but his dad, yeah, oh well, so what, it happened, and they accepted it. We couldn't have the wedding we wanted, but we had a big reception at the Armenian Hall where people brought gifts, nice gifts, and it was really nice. There was a lot of people who came, and
Where was that?
that was held at the Armenian Hall in East LA. There was probably at least 100 people there, all who spoke Armenian, and I didn't, but that's okay. I would ask the lady next to me what they said, and you know, it was nice.
Tell the story about the first time you met him.
Jim?
No, you did that. No, Grandpa.
Grandpa? Oh my.
The first time.
The first time I met my father-in-law, but I didn't know it was my father-in-law then. I was working in the theater, and we had a long line waiting for seats because we were completely packed. Good movie, I can't remember what it was. And he wanted a loge seat, which those were the soft seats in the back, not down front. Very comfortable. And he said, give me one loge. And I said, I'm sorry, sir, I can't. You see the line? We're full, we're packed. I said, give me a loge. He pushed his money at me through the window. And I said, sir, I told you we don't have any loge. You have to wait in that line. So he went to the manager, okay? And just luckily, his luck was okay. They found one seat for him. But oh, you should have seen the look he gave me. He didn't like me at all. So anyway, a couple of nights later, Jim said, I want you to meet my parents. So I said, fine. But I was scared, not knowing, how Armenians were. And I went over, and his mother was in there alone, so I met her first. And she's so friendly, all smile. I had a very good mother-in-law. Most people would be grateful, most girls would be grateful to have one like mine. Wonderful woman. And then he said, here comes my dad. He drove up in the driveway in this big new Buick, They always drove new cars. And when he walked in, I thought I was just going to die right there in the seat, because it was that man that was in line that I was mean to because he was so mean to me. And he said, and this is my dad. And I said, I know. And I said, how do you do? And he went, it's all right. It's okay. Like that, the Armenian thing. And then I would go back and forth to, have dinner and stuff. And one day, I guess Jim had told him that he might want to marry me. And my father-in-law said, stand up, Chopoli. I don't know what Chopoli meant. I still don't know what it means. But he said, stand up, Chopoli. And I stood up, and he said, turn around. By the way, I was 36, 26, 36, with good legs then. Anyway, and I turned around, and he went, yeah, it's okay. He was saying that I looked like I could bear children, So he was happy about that.
And talk about how you used to help him because he didn't understand English.
Oh yeah, I helped him with his driver's test because he didn't know. I had to.
So because he didn't speak English.
Because he didn't speak English well. He spoke English. And believe me, when he figured out a contract with his two sons, he used the abacus or whatever it was, and he had the answer before they had it on the adding machine. He was a smart man when it came to money. But he couldn't read the English, so I would read it to him and try to explain to him. So he would pass tests. I even went with him to White Memorial Hospital, which was the biggest hospital in Los Angeles. I went with him when he needed to fill out forms because he had leukemia longer than anyone. He had the killer kind of leukemia, And this Armenian doctor kept giving him shots, and we don't know what was the medicine he was using, but it kept him alive. And so he didn't know how to fill out the papers, so I filled them out for him. He thought of me because he told me this. He thought of me as a daughter because he lived with me and Jim when we came to Hemet to start the hog ranch. He lived with us. His father lived with us for 2 years. I cooked and did his clothes and everything. Benny came down, Jim's brother, my brother-in-law. He lived with us for 2 years. I did his clothes, his laundry, and cooked the food. So it couldn't have been too bad to cook because they stayed 2 years, each one of them. And then his uncle Mike came down, and he lived with us for 2 years. The old Mike. Then after the old Mike, the young Mike Agopian came down, and he lived with us for 2 years. So I had round-the-clock company a lot while my kids were growing up.
And talk about the hog ranch.
We had a hog ranch from 1950. I don't know how many years. It was a lot of years until the government bought it out from under us, and we had to sell. We didn't have a choice. We had 106 acres out there, and in Winchester, which was 20 or 30 minutes from Hemet. And we had these big garbage trucks, long diesel garbage trucks. And we picked up tons and tons of garbage. Like we had a contract with the city of Santa Ana, which was huge at one time. We had city of Los Angeles at one time. You had to bid on these contracts. And that's why I said my father-in-law was very smart in math. Even though he couldn't read English, he was smart in math. And so were the boys. So they'd get together, they'd bid on a contract, we'd get it, and that's the way we made our money. We shipped our hogs to Farmer John, which is still a company today that makes the bacon and pork chops and what have you. And my husband had a favorite hog, a female, sow. I don't know one hog from the other, but I saw him out there. Anyway, this hog, every time my husband would walk down the aisles that they had, would lie down on her back so he could scratch her belly. His dad kept saying, "When are you going to send that hog to market?" "Oh, Dad, do we have to send her now? I don't want her to go." And that hog, I think, lived to old age. I really do. There was another one that they had that was kind of what you might call a midget pig. And the people that lived in the house on the ranch, they took this pig and they made it into one like you see on TV that can actually act, sit up like a dog. They painted his toenails. It would make a noise to get food. It was cute. It really was. Then he had a horse out there. The first time I walked towards that horse, he got up on his hind legs and I thought he was going to stomp me in the ground. I thought, well, it was just that one time, right? But my hands were sweaty because I guess deep down I was afraid of the horse. So every time I'd go with the horse to the hog ranch, the horse wouldn't let me come towards it because that horse hated me. It could smell my fear. And so I didn't go only when I had to. But there was no telephones out there because the telephone lines were too expensive to go miles and miles and miles, and we would have to pay for that. So I'd have to get in the car, put John in the front seat, Dolly in the little baby seat, and I'd have to drive all the way out there and all the way back. And there were so many times when I ran over these big snakes across the road, and I'd have to shut my eyes because I'm deathly afraid of them. And I'd have to shut my eyes and just keep driving until I got there and gave them the message. And then that way they could go fix the truck and bring it in. So it was, I had an easier life because I lived in town.
Were those paved roads?
No, they were dirt roads. Yeah. All windy. They wound and wound and wound and went uphill and downhill, uphill, downhill. There were lots of dips. So the government came and they said, I don't remember when this was, 50, 60, 70, whatever. And they said, we want to put in a lake. Lake Skinner is what it eventually became. They said, and we want the property. This is what we're going to give you. And so I was still working for Brubaker Realty. And we had a man come in that asked my boss if he needed paving done in the back of the office. And so Roger hired this man. His name was Paul something. And Paul was talking to Roger. He said, do you know anybody that has a truck that could haul some asphalt? And luckily my husband had the truck. So I called him and he said, sure, I'll haul for you. So he hauled. It took 2 days for them to become partners in the asphalt business. And that was needed it was really needed in Hemet because there was none. So it turned out that my husband bought the business from Paul and we became JB Commercial Paving Company, which was very lucrative because we got all the jobs, everything.
And why was it called JB?
It was called JB. I named both the companies because I said they wanted to name it something else. I can't remember what. And I said, well, why don't you call it Jim and Ben? JB. He added the commercial. I didn't. And when we bought when we bought the garbage company, they wanted to name it Oganesian Haulers the Second or something to that effect. And I said, no. Why don't we name it OK Associates? And Jim said, why would you make O? I said, O period, K period. I said, that stands for Oganesian Kazaroff. And it sounds good. In the phone book, it looks good. So they accepted that.
So wasn't there a story, back to the hog ranch for a second, wasn't there a story of you and a snake?
Oh, Lord. One day, back to the hog ranch, Jim says, ride out there with me in the truck, which I never did, ever. But I did this time. And someone was babysitting you and Dolly. And we were going up this hill, and we were quite a little ways from the hog ranch, but we were on the paved highway in Winchester. And he said, uh-oh, we've got a flat. He says, let me get out and see. And he said, come here and look at this flat. We really have a flat. It was on the outside, the big wheels, you know. And so I'm standing there looking at it, you know. And he said something to me, and I turned. He was looking at the opposite tire on the other side, and I looked. I had on what they call thong shoes. It just went through your toes, and your foot was bare. And I felt something crawl on my foot, both feet actually. And Jim said, don't move. And I said, why? Don't look down. And I knew. It was a rattlesnake. Went right over my feet. I can feel it right now.
So what happened?
Just crawled away.